The Tin Soldier is taking credit for the deeds of the real ones. Now your companion, young lady, he wrapped himself in glory on December 29, 1890.
What does he mean?
You don't want to know.
Strangely, the game never actually explains the Wounded Knee event. It just sort of assumes that everyone is on board with the basic idea that it was a massacre by the 7th Cavalry, or that generally speaking, white man bad, Indians good, and that this exhibit must be racist propaganda. There are depictions of Indians killing and scalping white women, which again are meant to be mocked as racist propaganda. But this actually happened. And quite a lot. Here's one account of what 2 Denver men came across in 1864. Quote, "About 100 yards from the desolated ranch, we discovered the body of the murdered woman and her 2 dead children, one of which was a little girl of 4 years, and the other an infant. The woman had been stabbed in several places and scalped, and the body bore evidences of having been violated. The 2 children had their throats cut, their heads being nearly severed from their bodies." Unquote. Up ahead is another George Washington automaton that recites a poem about Wounded Knee.
With hue and cry, with hatchet red, they danced amongst our noble dead. But when our soldiers took the field, the savage horde could only yield.
Now, this is obviously not exactly how the Battle of Wounded Knee went, but that's the point. This is supposed to be evil patriotic American propaganda covering up a horrible crime against the supremely peaceful Sioux Indians. Inside the next room, Slate addresses us again over the intercom.
You were there. At Wounded Knee. I can see it in your face.
Tell her, Booker! Tell her how we strode that battlefield like the heroes of Sparta. I still hear the screams. Let's come, stop.
There he is!
Here's the soldier I spoke of! The kind of man Comstock pretends to be! See if I told you true!
We'll ignore the mischaracterization of the Spartans, and instead focus on the slander against the 7th Cavalry, who most certainly didn't have some sort of bloodlust that enticed them to make war on the Sioux that day. Contrary to popular belief, the Sioux were not a peaceful people. Robert Utley's description of Sioux culture on pages 10 and 11 of his book, The Last Days of the Sioux Nation, are quite helpful in understanding this. Quote, "The highest values of the Tetons centered on war. For a young man, success in battle offered the surest and quickest path to prestige, wealth, and high rank. A collection of enemy scalps was his badge of success, and together with the qualities of bravery, daring, and cleverness, earned him the esteem of men and the admiration of women." Unquote. It should also be stressed here that in the months leading up to the Battle of Wounded Knee, the Sioux Indians had adopted a New Age religion called the Ghost Dance. A Paiute man named Vovoka from Nevada was its originator, and his teachings supposedly were peaceful, instructing Indians not to fight the white man. But, by some accounts, however, this stipulation was subservient to the general idea that supernatural forces were going to destroy the white man and bring back the old ways of the Indian.
The white man, my children, will soon be no more.
Now, Vovoka was probably an opportunistic charlatan, but we won't get into that due to time constraints. The main focus here is that different tribes held different interpretations of Vovoka's ghost dance prophecy. The Sioux spoke of giant floods that would drown all the white people, or crush them in a tremendous landslide, which is exceedingly ironic given BioShock's extreme focus on an ahistorical genocidal Protestantism. A quote on page 70 of Robert Utley's book stands out insofar that it highlights the almost comical parallel. Quote, "Vovoka was but one of a long line of Aboriginal mystics who sought to rid their people of an alien oppressor and lead them into the promised land." Unquote. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Ken Levine and Irrational Games had no interest in exploring this Native American xenophobia and desire to repel the foreign hordes. In any event, by 1891, the spiritual leaders of the Sioux had begun pushing the idea that the ghost shirts, worn during the ghost dance, could actually deflect the white man's bullets. One woman who survived the Wounded Knee battle was told that she must remove her ghost shirt so that the whites could treat her injuries. She replied, quote, "Yes, take it off. They told me a bullet would not go through. Now I don't want it anymore," unquote. As one American official noted in the months leading up to Wounded Knee, quote, "It would seem impossible that any person, no matter how ignorant, could be brought to believe such absurd nonsense. But as a matter of fact, a great many Indians of this agency actually believe it. And since this new doctrine has been engrafted here from the more southern Sioux agencies, the infection has been wonderful and so pernicious that it now includes some of the Indians who were formerly numbered with the progressive and more intelligent, and many of our very best Indians appear dazed and undecided when talking of it, their inherent superstition having been thoroughly aroused," unquote. Naturally, these new religious activities had the U.S. Army and local white settlers concerned. The Sioux were pulling their children out of school to, as one teacher put it, go to church every day. His classroom went from 60 pupils in September to just 3 in October. As this was happening, the Sioux were cashing in firewood receipts from the Indian agencies for a third of their value to buy up ammunition, and many were out slaughtering other people's livestock. They were also abandoning their farms in droves at a point when the government was desperately trying to get them off welfare. Indeed, throughout this entire ordeal, the U.S. government continuously gave the Sioux free food, housing, and clothing, as they were literally dancing to their gods to induce white genocide. Attempts to arrest the Sioux bandits were often met with resistance. In one instance, the Indian police from the local Indian agency went to arrest a Sioux by the name of Little, who had been stealing and killing settlers' livestock. But they were surrounded by an angry mob of 200 ghost dancers who were shouting to kill the lawmen, burn the agency, and take control. However, one Indian in the crowd spoke up in opposition. Quote, "Stop, think, what are you going to do? Kill these men of our own race? Then what? Kill all these helpless white men, women, and children? And what then? What will these brave words, brave deeds, lead to in the end? How long can you hold out? Your country is surrounded with a network of railroads. Thousands of white soldiers will be here within 3 days. What ammunition have you? What provisions? What will become of your families? Think, my brothers. This is a child's madness," unquote. So in other words, the only thing that restrained them from murdering white women and children was the realization that there would be consequences for doing so. While you're digesting that little tidbit of knowledge, consider that a rancher in the area, James Phillip, stated that a band of Sioux Indians had camped on his property on November 18th. One of the braves, quote, boasted of the day when he had smashed open the heads of white children and drunk the blood of white women. The time was coming, he vowed, when he would do it again, unquote. On December 19th, a band of Lakota peoples, numbering somewhere around 400 individuals, camped outside the store of a local white man named James Kavanaugh and began doing ghost dances. Eventually, they went into Kavanaugh's store and intimidated him into giving them free provisions. The band's leader, Spotted Elk, aka Bigfoot, had also fought in the Sioux Wars against America a few years prior, so it's hardly surprising that his name had already ended up on a government watch list. Lieutenant Colonel Edwin Sumner of the 8th Cavalry had been ordered to find and keep watch on Bigfoot's band until further notice. Eventually, Sumner was ordered to escort Bigfoot's band to Camp Cheyenne and hold them there. When Sumner confronted Bigfoot, Bigfoot told Sumner that this might cause unrest among his people, and that Sumner should allow Bigfoot's band to return to their home at Cherry Creek. The colonel therefore told Bigfoot that his people could go to their homes and that he himself could remain with them if he promised to come to Camp Cheyenne the next day for a council and to bring all the Standing Rock people with him. Bigfoot gave his promise. Of course, the next day came and went with no word from Bigfoot, who had simply moved on without informing Sumner. After Bigfoot's escape from Cherry Creek, the order was given to arrest him by high command, though Bigfoot's band continued to roam the countryside for some time. Eventually, though, he contracted pneumonia and was intercepted by Major Whitside of the 7th Cavalry on December 28th. Whitside told John Shangro, his scout and interpreter, that he wanted Bigfoot's people to hand over their weapons. Shangro advised Whitside against demanding this right then and there, and suggested instead that they head to Wounded Knee Creek, make camp there, and then disarm the band the next morning. Whitside heeded the advice, and they all set out for Wounded Knee Creek. Now, to highlight the absolute absurdity that the 7th Cavalry had any hostile intent, Major Whitside saw how sick Bigfoot was and had him transferred to an army ambulance wagon. and then attended to by one of his own physicians. Later, once camp had been made, the Sioux chief was also given a wood stove and a special tent, along with round-the-clock care. The next day, word was given for everyone to assemble in the center of the camp. They were told to hand over their weapons, and the Indians were allowed to deliberate privately. Bigfoot told his people to only hand over their broken weapons. It had been noted by everyone the day prior that the Sioux were well armed with Winchester repeaters, so when they handed over a few broken carbines, Whitside knew Bigfoot was up to no good. Whitside told his interpreter, quote, "You tell Bigfoot that he tells me that his Indians have no arms when yesterday at the time of surrender they were well armed. I am sure he is deceiving me," unquote. Bigfoot replied, quote, "They have no guns, only such as you have found. I gathered up all my guns at the Cheyenne River Agency and turned them in, and they were all burned up," unquote. The order was then given for the officers to search the camp. As piles and piles of weapons began to turn up, it became apparent that the women were active participants in deceiving the 7th Cavalry as well. They tried to hide the rifles by placing them under their skirts and sitting on top of them. During all this, Yellowbird, the group's medicine man, was wandering about the camp telling his fellow Sioux in their native language, quote, "Do not be afraid, and let your hearts be strong to meet what is before you. We are all well aware that there are lots of soldiers about us, and they have lots of bullets. But I have received assurance that their bullets cannot penetrate us. The prairie is large, and the bullets will not go towards you. They will not penetrate you," unquote. Here's part of James Mooney's official report compiled a year after the incident, explaining, essentially, what happened next. Quote, "While the soldiers had been looking for the guns, Yellowbird, a medicine man, had been walking among the warriors, blowing on an eagle-bone whistle and urging them to resistance, telling them that the soldiers would become weak and powerless, and that the bullets would be unavailing against the sacred ghost shirts, which nearly every one of the Indians wore. As he spoke in the Sioux language, the officers did not at once realize the dangerous drift of his talk, and the climax came too quickly for them to interfere. It is said one of the searchers now attempted to raise the blanket of a warrior. Suddenly, Yellowbird stooped down and threw a handful of dust into the air when, as if this were the signal, a young Indian, said to have been Black Fox from Cheyenne River, drew a rifle from under his blanket and fired at the soldiers, who instantly replied with a volley directly into the crowd of warriors, and so near that their guns were almost touching. From the number of sticks set by the Indians to mark where the dead fell, as seen by the author a year later, this one volley must have killed nearly half the warriors. The survivors sprang to their feet, throwing their blankets from their shoulders as they rose, and for a few minutes there was a terrible hand-to-hand struggle, where every man's thought was the kill. Although many of the warriors had no guns, nearly all had revolvers and knives in their belts under their blankets, together with some of the murderous war clubs still carried by the Sioux. The very lack of guns made the fight more bloody, as it brought the combatants to closer quarters," unquote. After this initial exchange, the fighting became very intense. Robert Utley's description is quite detailed and pulls from multiple sources, many more so than James Mooney. The end result was some 39 US soldiers killed, and, depending on which sources you cite, anywhere from 146 to over 300 Indians killed. William Payano, however, a member of the burial party and half Sioux himself, recorded 102 men and women of adult age, 24 old men, 7 old women, 6 boys between 5 and 8 years old, and 7 babies under 2. That's far fewer than the purported 300 plus that some people like to claim. Now, were women and children killed? Yes, but not intentionally, and this needs to be stressed. A lot of women and children were simply killed unintentionally by both sides in the crossfire. Indian men were firing into groupings of US soldiers dispersed within the Indian camp, and the Sioux all throughout the battle continued to fire on US troops while still among their own women and children, thereby forcing the 7th Cavalry to return fire. Moreover, there are accounts of women outright engaging in the fighting. One old woman shot at soldiers on horseback and was even allowed to continue firing without retaliation as she fled the battle. Another crawled out from her teepee with a knife and stabbed a wounded American in the chest who lay incapacitated on the ground. To illustrate just how vicious the fighting was, a priest who had been friends with the Indians was stabbed in the back, and a reporter who had come to document the event was forced to fire on the Indians as well who tried to kill him. As for the infamous usage of Hotchkiss guns that fired into the teepees, well, you can blame that on Indians firing from inside the teepees. This includes Yellowbird, who had helped instigate the entire mess. The fact is, had the Sioux simply handed over their weapons, none of this would have happened, and they probably wouldn't have been asked to hand over their weapons had they not been robbing white settlers. Now, while I do retain some sympathy for the Plains Indians during westward expansion, the idea that they never brought hostility on themselves is absurd. These were not reasonable, peaceful peoples. These were hunter-gatherers whose entire identity centered on warfare and conflict.